Now you can be seated.
Well, that praise song did my soul a world of good this morning. Once again, we have another scripture passage that is just kind of weird. And weird is wonderful, I have discovered in my life, and I celebrate weird. Um, there's a whole city in Texas that celebrates weird. It's called Austin. They do. No, seriously. They said, that we're weird and they love it. Yeah, so, anyway, it's from the Gospel of Luke. So let's just get on with the scripture lesson and the sermon. Um, the apostles said to the Lord, "Increase our faith." He replied, "If you have faith as small as a mustard seed, you can say to this mulberry tree, 'Be uprooted and planted in the sea,' and it will obey you. Suppose one of you has a servant plowing and looking after the sheep. Will he say to the servant when he comes in from the field, 'Come along now and sit down and eat'? Won't he rather say, 'Prepare my supper, get yourself ready, and wait on me while I eat and drink? After that, you may eat and drink'? Will he thank the servant because he did what he was told to do? So you also, when you have done everything you were told to do, should say, 'We are unworthy servants. We have only done our duty.'" All right. So, notice how it begins. The disciples say to Jesus, or maybe it's more of a demand, "Increase our faith." Jesus, take the wheel, right? And Jesus doesn't say that he will or that he will not. In his typical Jesus way, he responds with a parable. And you know that drove the disciples crazy. Just tell us plainly. Well, the kingdom of God is like. So he starts with a parable talking about faith the size of a mustard seed. And if you have faith even that big, which I'm assuming a mustard seed is a tiny little thing, if you just have that much faith, you can say to this mulberry tree over here, "Be uprooted and cast into the ocean." Now, personally, I don't know what a mulberry tree looks like. But even if I had that kind of faith, if I saw a mulberry tree, I don't know that I would be so offended by it that I'd want to cast it up into the ocean and have it uprooted. So that was his response to increase my faith. So it's all very clear now, isn't it? Oh, okay. Well, Jesus must have sensed the looks on their faces very much the looks on yours right now. Like, what? So he said, well, let's suppose that you are a landowner and you have a servant who plows your fields and he watches your sheep. And at the end of the day, do you say to your servant, sit down and let's have supper together? He says, no, you wouldn't do that. You would say to your servant, fix my meal and give me something to drink. And after I have had my meal and you've cleaned up, then you can sit down and have your rest. And then he goes on to say, and does the landowner say to the servant, "Oh, thank you so much, you work so hard"? No, he doesn't, because the servant is doing what the servant is supposed to do. There's no gratitude for that, just doing his job. Then he goes on to say at the end of the verse that we're just all unworthy servants. Now, that was a stumbling block for me. I grew up in a religion that constantly shared about how unworthy we were. And whenever you just have it drained in you that somehow you're lesser than and you're unworthy, it makes it very difficult to finish the commandment of love your neighbor as you what? Yeah, if you're unworthy and you're always in that state and, oh, God, have mercy on me, I'm an unworthy person. Yeah, it makes it very difficult. Because what I have found is just the opposite. It's when I've learned to love and honor myself that it increased my capacity to be able to love and honor others and to be able to do a lot more help and work than I used to do when I would just loathe me all the time because I thought that's what God wanted me to do. So he does the whole unworthy. And I remember talking to Latrell. I said, Latrell, I said, I was going along really well, and I got to that whole unworthy thing. And she says, well, maybe it was just sarcasm. I thought, that's interesting. And I'm going to really date myself, but do many of you remember a comedy sketch show? I think it was back in the 80s. In Living Color, do you remember? Some of you remember enthusiastically. But they used to have a recurring sketch about a Jamaican family, right? And the one that I vaguely recall was Jamaican Air. So you see this family, they're not only flying the plane, but they maintain the plane and they repair it. They're fixing the meals on the plane, and then you see one of them ironing the uniforms for the rest of the team. And then one of the parents looks to their son and they say, how many jobs you got? And the son says, I got 10 jobs. They say, you lazy bum. Now you can't work 10 jobs and be a lazy bum. And that has been a running joke the whole 16 years that Kevin has been with us, because as you know, Kevin has many jobs. The life of a musician, right? Or an artist in general. So how many jobs you got, Kevin? I got 5 jobs. You lazy bum. So I'm thinking that maybe it was kind of I'm hoping I can take it better if that was indeed the case. That Jesus saying, yeah, this servant does all this work and he doesn't complain and he doesn't get thank yous or rewards for it. He just does it. And, oh, he must be unworthy. I'm thinking that's a very worthy servant. Very worthy servant. So going back to now the command the disciples gave Jesus. Increase our faith. Well, let's look at how do we increase our faith? I can promise you, God just not going to look down upon you one day and say, I'm just going to increase your faith. You are now full of faith. If you make that claim, I'm going to look at you and think maybe you're full of other stuff. Falsehoods. How do we increase our faith? The text shares with us it takes a lot of work. Your faith is increased because you work so hard to make it so. Let's start back at the beginning of the parable. He talked about a mustard seed. Now, a seed cannot fulfill its full potential until it does what? It's planted, right? And so, thinking about a seed, it took me way back in the olden days when I was in elementary school before YouTube, and you could see anything in the world on it, instructions or anything, that we had a science experiment in elementary school. And I think it was a butter bean. It was a big old green bean. And we started out the science experiment by taking toothpicks and putting it on this side and then 2 on that side. And then we had a mason jar that we filled with water. And then we set about 2/3 of the bean underwater and the rest was on top. And then we set it in the sunlight by the window. An amazing thing would start to happen after a few days. We noticed the bean would crack. And there'd be a little shoot coming out of one part of it. And then it would grow down and then another one would come. And then after a couple of weeks, then we would start seeing it breaking at the top. And then something would start growing. And then after a period of time, the bean seemed to disappear. And you had the roots in the jar and the beautiful bean plant on top. And it was a wonderful thing to behold. But look what happened to the bean. In order for it to fulfill its full being self, it had to trust the process, did it not? It had to trust that someone was going to take it and put it into the water or under the ground. And then as it's becoming its full self, it's being broken in two. Stuff is coming out of it. It's starting to take on a whole different form and shape. I think this is a beautiful example of what it means to increase faith. First of all, you have to trust the process. You have to trust the process. I want to increase my faith. That is a wonderful thing. Then you have to trust the process of what it's going to require you to do. You see, for me, having a lot of faith does not mean I have all the answers. For me, having a lot of faith is I'm willing to go through that process, not knowing how it's going to manifest itself and how it's going to end. That to me is faith. So if you want to increase your faith, first of all, you have to have the intention and then the trust that if I plant myself, I know that this process is going to change me. It's going to rearrange me. It's going to make me become something that maybe I have no idea what it is right now, but I'm willing to do whatever it takes to be a person who is now fulfilling themselves, right? It's the first thing. The second thing that we see in the parable is the one with the servant. It's work, a lot of work. It's working it every day. While you're working your other job, while you're raising families, while you're going to school, while you're dealing with parents or children, and it's work. While you're dealing with good times and sad times, while you're dealing with death and dying, while you're dealing with betrayal, it's work. Somehow, through the process, when we trust the Spirit of God working with our spirit, that I don't know what's going to happen, but I know that in the core of my being, I know that this is exactly where I need to be and what I need to be doing right now, even though I don't understand it and I can't see the end of it. For me, a big part of growing in faith goes way beyond of studying, going to classes, going to seminars, way beyond times in quiet and reflection, meditation, prayer, journaling. It goes beyond that. For me, my faith has increased because I choose to live life and experience it, not sweep it under the rug or try to stuff it into the closet. At times, life is very painful. This last week is a good example of that for me. Going through the ordeal with Brian and then learning that one of the most beautiful human beings on the planet who helped so many people to heal passed away in his sleep. Talking to his widow, my friend Darlene. He went to bed Friday night and didn't wake up Saturday morning. He was only 71 years old. Yeah. And, I, and that was on top of all the other stuff that had been happening. And I remember saying to Amy, my wife, that Amy, I've lived long enough to know that all that I'm going through and all the emotions and things that I'm feeling and experiencing will eventually pass and go away. But today it feels like forever. And I know you all know what I'm talking about. Sometimes when we are in those life experiences, we're going to get through it, but at the moment it feels like forever. And what I celebrate is the fact that at age 62, that in spite of what's going on in the world around me and what's going inside my brain and what emotions I'm feeling, there is a knowing, a confidence that's in my soul that stays, that's the rudder. It's the thing that keeps me on my path. It's the thing that brings me a foundation. That I know in spite of all that's going on, I know who I am. I'm clear about what I am doing. And somehow I still have a peace within me. And that for me is how I experience faith. That's how faith has grown in me. There are times when life makes you feel like you've just been uprooted and cast into the sea, and you're not really sure why. But that's life. When we come to this earth, that's the gig. That's a part of it. You know, as I went to the Who concert a couple of weeks ago, they had a pre-show act. The name of the band was Rain Wolf, 3 guys. And it was so bad. Everything was distortion, and it was really loud. The vocals were distorted, the guitar was distorted, the drum, everything was distorted. And my ears hurt. And I'm not like, turn that loud noise down. That's what I heard from my dad. I would never do that. And I remember texting Amy, she had to actually leave. Said, I hope I never have to hear this band again. And after hearing them, I may never hear again. But I had to go through that before I got to see, Daughtry and Townsend do their thing. And I see that that's life, right? Sometimes we have to go through the pain. We have to go through it. We have to deal with it head on, experience it, feel it. And when we do that, we're able to move beyond it. So faith. I think faith is just having a knowing. And that's the best way I can describe it. It's just a knowing. It's not just an intellectual brain knowing, but it's just a whole spiritual knowing that eventually I will discover that which I'm seeking. I might not feel like I have a lot of faith today, but when I see where I was and see where I am, I can see, oh, wow, look at the journey I've taken and how I've been able to handle and deal with things. And in spite of all the things that life turns our way, I still have the capacity to love and to laugh, to celebrate, and to heal and to help. See? Faith. I think faith is being willing to do whatever it takes without knowing what that is. Look at Jesus, a good example. I believe that Gethsemane was his greatest act of faith. You combine all the miracles and everything combined, Gethsemane was the greatest act of faith for him. He knew intellectually what he was about to experience was going to be very painful, physically, emotionally, betrayal, shock. He knew that what he was about to do was going to be, his life would never be the same. So in that quiet place there in the olive grove, where he was praying, he must have been thinking, okay, I could take my disciples and we could go to Galilee and people would hide us out there, or we could go to Syria, or maybe to some other country, and we'll just leave until the dust settles and then we'll come back and continue. I'm sure it must have crossed his mind. And there at Gethsemane, he was praying, God, if there is any other way for me to manifest myself completely and fulfill all that I came here to do, God, I am listening to suggestions and other ideas right now. And the story is tragic because he experienced the same thing we do when we cry out to God in our pain. Silence. Deafening silence. God wasn't giving him anything. God, I can now see the mob coming down the valley with their torches, and they're starting to come up the hill. And when you go to Jerusalem, you're going to see that place. And they're starting to come up the hill with their, okay, God, we kind of need to hurry this along. If you've been contemplating this and maybe looking at pros and cons, we need to bypass that now. I need a suggestion. And like the rest of us, it just seemed to be an absence. Nothing. And then we hear Jesus say in his prayer, not my will, but yours. And then he faces what he had to face head on. That, for me, friends, is faith. Faith is doing what we need to do, regardless of what the consequences or the outcome is going to be. We do it not knowing. And thankfully, Jesus, the seed of all love, unconditional love, allowed himself to be planted so that he could manifest himself and his glory and his love and his kindness and his teachings fully. So even 2,000 years later, we're still celebrating and learning from him. Think about that. Wouldn't it be wonderful to be able to leave a legacy upon this planet where you are still teaching and healing people long after your body has gone away? See, that to me is faith. So how do we increase our faith? You start with the question. I want to increase my faith. How do I do it? And then you trust all that follows for the rest of your life that's going to teach you and reveal to you what all that experience is going to give. Thus ends the lesson. Amen. This is World Communion Sunday. So now our Stevens ministers are going to educate us a bit about World Communion Sunday and about the different breads, and they're going to lead us in this part of the service. So I hand it over to you now, Walter.